Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you all for coming tonight to listen. I also would like to begin by acknowledging that we are here on Gadigal land and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I was speaking at a renters' rights rally out the front of the New South Wales Parliament this week and acknowledged the fact that potentially the worst situation that you could have in terms of housing and renters' rights and ownership of land and property is the disenfranchisement and the treatment of Aboriginal people in this country. And I think we should always acknowledge that we are on Gadigal land, but use that acknowledgement to actually make a commitment to do more to fight for Aboriginal justice in this country and in this state. The rates of youth incarceration of Aboriginal young people in New South Wales is beyond appalling. And I think if we're ever going to do anything, and if we as people that care about these things are ever going to do anything, then I think we should do more to address that complete injustice, because that is entrenching further inequality and injustice for many, many decades and generations to come. It's kind of weird, because I always said I was not going to be the person that would talk about sort of, the party, and other people can do the analysis and whatever else. And so I feel like maybe there's a risk that in this topic it sounds like what you're going to get is a whole lot of numbers and maps of electoral seats and various things. And I feel like Justin and I are not going to deliver on that. So apologies if there were people that wanted PowerPoint presentations with numbers and graphs and growth over time and results in different seats. I can tell you a couple of electoral facts. Justin has mentioned one of them. In New South Wales, we do have 3 lower house MPs in the New South Wales Parliament. Until we elected Lydia Thorpe in Victoria, we had the most lower house Greens MPs of any state in the country. It is an important fact to recognise, because you might read some of the Australian version of what happens in the New South Wales Greens and believe that we are a complete basket case, but actually that's not the case. We do very well electorally, as well as being able to get good results and set the agenda. The other fact I can tell you is that in the seat of Newtown, the state seat of Newtown, we hold the highest primary vote of anywhere of a Green seat in the country. And the reason why I say that is because I think it shapes the way that we look at how we push the agenda and what we can achieve when we run hard electorally and get good electoral success, but also the ability to be able to get good electoral success while at the same time pushing what is seen as quite a controversial or radical or boundary-changing agenda. So I might just go back then in terms of results back to 2015 and the campaign we ran in Newtown to say to you that at the time we went to print on a community news that which looked like your average sort of Clover Moore, City of Sydney Council-esque, nice pretty pictures, coloured design, glossy brochure style thing you get in your letterbox, which we had produced for the Newtown campaign. We had in there as one of our featured stories a story about the idea of banning sniffer dogs. And we had another one in there about introducing rent caps and putting an end to no grounds evictions. Things that I think people would say, well, pretty much that is looking a little bit like electoral failure at this point in terms of putting those things out there. We got a huge return on our primary vote, not just on those 2 issues, on a strong range of campaigns, but we got very little pushback. In fact, we tried really hard to push the boundaries, to pick fights, and we couldn't find the edge where people would bite back. And I think that shows, as a community, how often we might self-censor. And as a group of campaigners, as a group of people that care about politics, that at times there are risks that we self-censor, thinking that this is going to be electorally unpopular, this is going to cause controversy, this is going to do these things. In the Newtown campaign, we actively tried to pick fights, because we wanted to, not in a non-violent way, of course, because we're the Greens, but we wanted to be able to take up things that would actually get the sort of the powers that be coming back at us and seeing us as a threat. But as we pushed these things out there, people were actually open to the ideas that we were putting out. They thought they made sense. They thought that they were important. Sure, the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales put out a media release saying the Greens don't know what they're talking about. But apart from that, we didn't get much of a response. And the reason why I talk about that is because I think it's really important when we're talking about the Greens and where we're headed and where we're going, is to actually talk about the fact that we can have electoral success while at the same time we push the boundaries and push the agenda on things. And I think it's important to recognise that. I think it's important to say that we can get that kind of vote, we can get those kind of results while at the same time pushing the boundaries. And that's important to recognise. I point back always to the front page of the Daily Telegraph in an election long gone where they had Jamie Parker standing outside of a school, and the Daily Telegraph exposed the Greens drugs policy, which was basically a harm minimisation approach to drugs, but claimed by the Daily Telegraph to be the Greens wanting to hand drugs out to school children. And at that time, it was scandal and it was front page of the Telegraph. Well, fast forward and you see that actually now you have discussions happening openly in the media about pill testing. You have discussions happening about the end to sniffer dogs. You have an approach around injection in safe injecting rooms, and you recognise the need for harm minimisation. Richard Di Natale coming out with a Legalise It campaign around cannabis. These things move and shift, but only if we're willing and bold enough to take those agendas and take those steps and move them forward. So I think that that's important to realise, that the results that we get are not necessarily just the results and the electoral success or not success. It's also about how we work in with the campaign and push the agenda on those things. The thing that I think is really crucial, and the reason why I think it's so important that we continue to hold seats and continue to grow electorally, is actually so we have the voice and we have the capacity to mobilise and engage people and to push the boundaries on those campaigns, because we know that's when people pay attention. We know that's when the media is watching, and we know when that's how people's agendas are set for the next period of time. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I consider to be the biggest result that we have got in relation to the Newtown campaign and for the Greens, and that's the push around renters' rights. In 2014, but while I was still a candidate, we made a commitment to introduce a package of reforms. Justin mentioned Scott Ludlam and the loss of him that we have in this not having him anymore in the Senate. He came to Chippendale. We stood in front of a terrace house and we launched the Greens plan for renters' rights, which included the idea of ending no grounds evictions, imposing rent caps in line with CPI and at a maximum of once per year. We announced that package, and at that stage no one else was talking about renters' rights. Labor had been the ones that had introduced changes to allow for dodgy landlords to kick people out in the former Labor government, and it was clear that the Liberals weren't going anywhere. Fast forward until the end of last year, and we had built a campaign strong on pushing on renters' rights. An amazing amount of coalition groups had come together to make the Make Renting Fair campaign, and the push was on. Labor then came out and said that they were going to support an end to no grounds evictions. And in classic Labor style, all power to them, they say that a future Labor government will end no grounds evictions. Now, I was just this week standing outside, as I said, of Parliament at a rally with Luke Foley. He spoke and then I spoke, and we were both talking about renters' rights. In 2014, there was no leader or opposition leader talking about renters. There was no one talking about renters' rights. The reality is that we as a party, as the Greens, can show people and create the space to show that it is safe to start entering into these territories and talking about these things. And I think that that is a role that we can play. And Justin mentioned some of the priorities he has for 2019. I'm happy to chat more about some of the ones that I have, but I think that it's really important, and I think it's really exciting to think as a community of people that want to see real change and don't like the way the system is currently happening. We can be setting that agenda and deciding now what is it, where are the boundaries we want to push next, what are the things that actually we want to see shifts and moves on. And so I think that, to me, is part of the reason why I'm so inspired to continue to engage with electoral politics, even though the reality of having sit there in the Parliament and listen to the vile nature of the way people behave is not something that I would necessarily choose to do with my time. A little tack to a different direction, I think, just in terms of something that Justin was talking about in terms of the North Coast and our connection to community movements. And I think that's the other thing that I like to point to in terms of the results. And I apologise if you were looking for numbers and spreadsheets and electoral maps, because that's not the kind of results I'm going to talk about. The other bit of the results is something that I think is really key, is that I don't want to ever be involved in a campaign where winning or losing is the only measure of the success. I don't want to be busting my gut for a year or more putting in an insane amount of resources and volunteer time and effort to basically have the only measure of whether we've succeeded or failed being the results that come up by Anthony Green on election night. The reality is that we know that we can campaign in a way that builds movements and builds stronger communities. And one of the things that I consider to be a defining moment in how we ran the Newtown campaign was that we were sitting in the election campaign office and a resident living in St Peters came in and said, I know you guys are against WestConnex. My house is going to be acquired. I think we should start a petition, but I've never made a petition before and I don't know how to make one. Someone said that you guys might know. So you can imagine how it might play in other electoral campaign offices. You can imagine how it might play in terms of those dynamics. But what we did is we said, all right, well, you shouldn't put the Greens logo on it because you will get maximum support if you don't. It should be a strong community campaign. We'll help you draft one. We can photocopy it for you. Here's some clipboards and pens. This is how you do it. Do you want to have a public meeting? Let's help you organise that. We can help letterbox to make it happen. What started there was the start of a massive groundswell of community campaigns against WestConnex. It's not to say in other areas they weren't happening already. But we chose at that point to recognise that if we left and didn't win on that 28th of March 2015, we knew that we had established the groundwork for that campaign against WestConnex, those communities that needed to campaign to fight for their residents' rights and fight for the fact that their communities were at risk, was strong and solid and empowered and skilled up, ready to go, whether we were in there or not. We knew it would help if we had a voice in Parliament, but we also knew that that wasn't the only thing we needed. And the fact that when I was then elected and we managed to collect 10,000 strong signatures and triggered a debate in Parliament on WestConnex, and many of those people that had been part of that initial kind of kickoff were able to be there, was an incredible result. But what I loved knowing when I did that and I got to table the petition was the fact that in actual fact that would have happened without me. That if we had supported that and we hadn't been successful in winning Newtown, they would have had the strength of the momentum and the structure of those campaigns to be able to still get that many signatures. And to me, that shows real results in a community and strengthening the way that communities are activated and engaged. And that means, you know, maybe it's self-interest. It takes the pressure off me as to whether or not we actually win on election night. But it does feel like there is more sustainability around that there's more of a commitment of movement building and skilling up that isn't just about the electoral results. So I might, in terms of that intro, leave it there. As Mary said, Justin and I were going to have a little chat with each other, but maybe we don't have time for that now. Great. Okay, so I might bring the mic back over here and we can have a chat, and then I think we're opening it up for questions. So thank you very much.